I wanted a brother who was like protective of me, and Rob's more of the literally at the Grand Canyon kept doing the like save your life, and that wasn't what I was looking for in an older brother.
Amazing. You're like, great, I just pissed my pants. You suck.
You know how I have a paralyzing fear of heights? Wouldn't it be fun if we were at a really high place and you kept pushing me off a cliff?
Oh my God. Lillian, we're back once again. We took a week off. I needed a week. I don't know if you did, but I finished my kitchen, so that's
Yay!
exciting. And now I'm ready to talk about our palate cleanser. How are you? How are you feeling about this?
I'm doing so good. I have so many feelings about this, and I'm so excited to, not that I don't love talking about Jane Eyre every week. I do, but I just feel like a palate cleanser was really what I needed, especially this particular palate cleanser.
Because this is like, would you say this is maybe one of your all-time favorite films? If not number one?
Yeah, it fights for number one with a couple other great films like About Love and stuff like that. But
cute.
Definitely, I have some things I'm going to talk about with how much I forgot that I love this movie and it was so lovely to watch again. But
so in case we haven't, because I don't think we've said yet, our palate cleanser that we just watched is Pride and Prejudice from 2006.
2005.
2005. Ah, yes.
One whole year before our last Jane Eyre adaptation.
Yes. But do you want to maybe start for those poor unfortunate souls who have maybe not seen this movie? Give us a quick synopsis of everything that they have missed out on.
First of all, what you doing, guys? Go out there and watch this. It's the greatest movie of all time.
It's really, really good.
So I'm going to do the fast version of the synopsis. So Pride and Prejudice starts with 5 sisters in a lovely little family that I would like to be adopted into. There's lots of love. They're very happy. And 2 rich hotties move into town. They have a dance, a dance that the whole town goes to. And very dramatically, these 2 hotties and then this one mean sister show up. And there's some drama at the ball, which we will talk about. And then a cousin who's going to inherit this lovely family's all their money and stuff. Because, ladies can't have houses.
No.
He shows up and he immediately falls in love with his second choice, who is Elizabeth Bennet. And he proposes to her. There's a whole scene about that. She says no. Then her friend, who's 27 years old, which, as we all know, is the age in which you should give up on love, because I've got a whole 3 days left of being 27 and I've given up on love.
Lillian, Mr. Collins is just about to knock on your door. Just wait.
Just waiting outside to be like, listen, I'm just saying, if you're going to compromise, do it now. In the meantime, Jane, her older sister, is falling in love with Mr. Bingley, who is the sweetest little goober on the planet. And Elizabeth definitely does not have the hots for Mr. Darcy. And it's important that she say that out loud to everyone frequently.
Yes.
Then it turns out he has the hots for her, because when she goes to visit her cousin, who used to be in love with her for sure, he is also there. And they have the best dramatic proposal scene in the rain, where they both say very mean things to one another. And then she goes, here's the reasons that I could never love you. And he goes, that's such a bummer. And then he goes out there, and unlike every man I've ever dated, he works really hard to correct the things that she criticized about him and make her life better and care about her. And then after he does all of this stuff, he very sweetly says, I did this for you, but he also makes it super clear that he didn't expect anything from that. But if she loves him, he loves her. And then they have a great confession of love. And then they get married, and they say cute things to each other on a dock.
Wow. Oh my gosh. It's like we've just watched the movie.
I know.
It was exciting for me to be transported back when I watched it, but I think it was also equally exciting to do it again just now with you. So thank you for that.
I do recommend watching the movie. If my summary is your first experience of Pride and Prejudice,
No, you can do better than that. Lillian, so my first note was also on the happy family dynamic. But the first thing that I think I want to open with before we dive into all kinds of critique and raving reviews is if you had to choose between Darcy or Bingley, who would you choose and why?
This is the meanest thing you've ever done to
See,
me.
I know my answers and they're complicated.
So I think if we're talking about like who in real life I think would make me live the happiest life and be my best self, it's going to be Bingley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But the person that I'm definitely in love with and would for sure choose, despite the fact that I don't think it would be the best choice for me and who I am as a person, is definitely Mr. Darcy.
Oh my God, my answer is the exact same because I was thinking about this. I'm like, they both have their charms and their pluses. And I think I view Bingley falls into the realistic love category of like, I want someone who's cute, who I can laugh with and have fun with. And it's just like, so calm and relaxing. And then Mr. Darcy is like the fictional romance where it's like, ooh, he's so brooding and mysterious and powerful. And he stands like a wall in a great oak tree in the middle of a field. And it's like, oh my. So yes, there's the reality and the fantasy.
Well,
And
and
they
I
both
also
fall into
think
that.
I also think for me, I have to think about who am I more like as a character?
Mhm.
Am I Jane, who's just the sweetest, constantly glowing angel of a person who just is like out here being a sweet little bean and who also needs a sweet little bean? Am I that person? Or am I the person who's so sarcastic that maybe no one will love her?
Oh my gosh, Lillian. So then Darcy is the one for you.
Yeah, the person who dances along the line of, was that funny or mean? And that's me. Every time. I tell people frequently, if you don't laugh, I'm just a bitch.
Oh my God. Well, unfortunately for both of these male love interests, both women's affections are misconstrued and hence we have the whole plot of our story, but
Yes.
we can get into that.
Well, I could talk for 6 years about my first impressions about this movie.
Mhm.
And I know they're not really our first impressions,
No.
but what are your kind of like high level feelings about this whole movie?
I would say my high level feelings are I think it is one of the most well done and widely accepted romances that we've gotten in recent years. And one of my ways of proving that is because Sam and I, my fiance and I, we watched this movie on Valentine's Day.
Cuties.
Yeah, because I was like, Sam, I need to watch this for the podcast, but it's also Valentine's Day. So let's watch it. And this is one of the only romance films that Sam enjoys watching with me. So it's accessible to a wide audience. And I think a big part of that comes down to, I mean, I've talked about this when I think we talked about the 2011 Jane Eyre, but it's visually beautiful. Like it's so well shot.
Mhm.
The musical score, I have a note here where I think the musical score is a character in itself. And the way
Mhm.
that piano instantly starts leading us through the house and then continues to lead us through the
Mhm.
story, I think is done so well. And the acting is amazing. I'm absolutely in love with Keira Knightley. Her as both Elizabeth. I mean, she plays Elizabeth also in Pirates. I was going to say in this and Pirates of the Caribbean is like my favorite of her acting repertoire. And so
Mhm.
anytime she's an Elizabeth, whether it's Bennett or Swan, I'm very on board. But
Yes.
also, I think the romance is done so well in ways that other movies try to do and they miss the ball. Where with this, the energy is palpable between them. When it's just looks and glances, you can feel it.
Mhm.
When they're yelling at each other, we know their inner feelings that say, actually, I love you, please grab me and kiss me, even though that's not what they're saying with their mouths, but they are kind of saying it with their mouths. But it's like the romantic tension is done some of the best in this movie than I've ever seen. Those are kind of my overarching thoughts.
Yeah, I think in addition to the absolutely gorgeous scenery, absolutely amazing soundtrack, both things that I noted down. One of the things that I was highly aware of too is just how every layer of filmmaking is used in this.
Yes.
The lighting in particular,
Yes.
the costuming, the set design, like every detail of this movie does a spectacular job of serving the story.
I agree.
And I think that romantic tension that you're talking about is something that we've actually talked a lot about with the adaptations of Jane Eyre, which is how do those quiet moments play?
Right.
Because I
Yeah.
think in the 83 version of Jane Eyre, I had a lot of complaints about those quiet moments because they weren't really serving the story. They just were filler. And I think the 2011 version is very similar to how this adaptation of Pride and Prejudice plays those quiet moments, which is we really see and feel the feelings of those characters. And I think that's a combination of all of the things that we're talking about, where I think the actors are fantastic. This is peak Keira Knightley, who is a fantastic actress to begin with. And this is like she was in everything in 2005.
Yes.
And she's so fantastic in this. But there's also the way that the music is leading us to understand their emotions more, the way the space and the scenery and the lighting, like even when you don't know why those things are affecting the feeling that you get from the movie.
Yeah.
It's all playing into that. And I think that that's one of the things that caught me on this watch before is, I know this movie incredibly well. I didn't know how well I knew this movie because I haven't watched it in a few years until I watched this alone. And it was very good that I watched it alone because anyone who was in the room would have gotten Lillian's dramatic reenactment of Pride and Prejudice.
Just quoting along.
Turns out, know all the words to this movie.
Incredible. Oh my God. That will serve well for a question that I have for you later on, but I think I want to wait since I asked you a question earlier. Before we move on, I kind of want to just add into this a little bit. I think the success of a romance, like we're kind of saying here, the success of a romance, a big part of it comes down to how well they handle romantic tension, at least in my opinion. And I believe that's true for both movies, and I believe it's true for stories as well. The novels that I read, when I'm seeking a good romantic story, for me, it's all about the buildup and the anticipation. And then once we get to that final, I kind of prefer I like a slow burn myself. I don't mind spending an entire novel of characters building that romantic tension to then finally come together at the end. And that's how it finishes. Because for me, I think the journey is more exciting sometimes than the destination. I've had stories before where the romantic tension ends too quickly, then they get together, and then the rest of the story is just little snippets of them continuing to get together or fighting and falling apart and then coming back together again. And I'm like, oh, you lost me after that was such a short roller coaster ride. I want it to go longer. But that's just me personally.
Well, and I'm a big fan of the whole enemies to lovers trope, which I think even how much are they enemies? But I think that this plays into that. That's the idea that they hate each other, but actually that's the strong feelings, love and hate being so close. Again, in life, let's not.
Right.
But in the romance that I'm watching, absolutely. And I love a male protagonist where he seems like a dick. he seems like a real jerk. And then it turns out that he was actually just a shy, passionate man who loves his friends and misunderstood, but was trying to do the right thing.
Oh my gosh.
He doesn't get along with that guy, but he was protecting his baby sister.
So I was saying out loud to Sam when we watched it on Monday that it really stood out to me, the scene in the ball part 2. Where I think I see this in part 1 as well, but in part 2, it hit me harder, where at that point, Lizzie has heard the story from Mr. Wickham and now has this negative opinion of Darcy. And so he is there already totally in love with her, but super shy and not very, socially awkward kind of, but not in a way that Mr. Collins is socially awkward, because that guy, the whole time, Sam and I were like, this poor little toad. But Darcy is socially awkward in a different way, where he was clearly raised to be a gentleman and he knows how to at least present as if he's confident, but inside he's very uncomfortable being in these situations. And so to see Lizzie jab at him throughout that night when he's just trying to be brave enough to talk to her and dance with her, I'm like, Lizzie, if only you knew how hard this is for him. He's trying to be with you.
Well, and that's that's the thing. There's so many people in life that I know like that, where you meet them and you're like, oh my God, you're so cool. And it's because they have that sort of mysterious swagger, and you just don't know anything about them. And like, and you interpret what they're doing. Like the fact that they're like not really talking to you is the fact because they're just so cool. Like the fact that he didn't dance with anyone at the first dance was like, the story she's telling herself is that it's because he thought he was too cool to dance.
Right.
But then like you actually get to know them and you're like, oh my God, you were so scared the whole time. And we can leave this in or cut this out depending on whether or not you think this person will be upset about including this. But it reminds me, as we're talking about this, I've never thought about this before. It reminds me so much of Zach and my first impressions of Zach. Cause I thought he was like, the first few times I met him, I thought he didn't like me because he was like too cool for me. And then I like heard from you guys like, nope, he's just like not the most extroverted person. He's a bit of an introvert and like doesn't talk about that stuff and just like doesn't really engage.
Dude, I love that you mentioned that. We're definitely keeping that in. And I'm just going to give a quick little bit of context. So Zach is my fiance's best friend. He looks kind of like a tall, like Scandinavian male model. And he's very quiet and kind of like aloof. He's essentially a modern day Mr. Darcy. But so like he does definitely present that cool guy vibe. But the thing that I will always think about Zach is, so we were playing Mario Kart one time and he always picked the character Shy Guy, which is like a little dude with like a mask and a little red like onesie. And I was like, hey, Zach, why do you always play as Shy Guy? And his response was, he's like, well, he's a shy guy and I'm also kind of a shy guy. And I was like, holy crap, Zach. What a thing to say. So yes, we know a Darcy in real life, and that is a very fair assessment.
Yes. But yeah, there's absolutely people like that who I think come off as very cool when you're not in their head, and then you get to know them. And I think that that's a big theme of this whole movie and the whole story is the idea that your perception of people and your interpretation of people's actions doesn't necessarily align to what they actually think and feel. So like, I think that's super clear with Jane and her feelings towards Bingley. Like we know that they're really in love. And I think the line that Elizabeth says during the best scene, which we will go into a lot of detail of all of the super steamy romantic scenes in this, when Darcy's saying like, I watched them and she didn't like him as much as he liked her. And Elizabeth is kind of yelling back at him that yes, she did. And she's like, my sister doesn't show her true feelings to me. Right. Like that's a level of like, they have different sides of like, those three characters are different versions of shy and scared. And I think that it's interesting to watch that and see Elizabeth, who is not those things, she's a very bold person, get put into a position where she starts behaving that way because he makes her nervous. And especially as she starts to like actually have feelings for him and realize that like there's an attraction there, the more that she becomes like nervous the way we all do when we're around a crush. And I think it makes her have more sympathy for him.
Yeah, no, that's a really good assessment, Lillian. I think the nervous scene for Lizzie with him, that is one of my favorites in the whole movie. I think I mentioned on this podcast earlier that I have a playlist on YouTube just called Love, and it's different clips from romantic movies that I love and I throw on when I'm feeling zappy. But one of the clips I have in there is the scene where after she's been creeping around his house and she peeps on him and his sister, and then he sees her and she runs and he goes after her. That scene where I love that first she's running away, and then when he calls her name, she stops and walks as if she was never running, even though he totally saw her running away. And then they turn and they have that little conversation, and there's like that big fern between them, which great visual placement, that kind of like, oops, here's this thing that's still between them. Her awkwardness there is so cute. And I love the look on his face is one of my favorite things of all. When she first tries to make like silly little excuses, and then she apologizes and she's like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And his face, he has this look like, oh no, don't be sorry, I'm just so glad you're here. And oh my gosh.
And both of their reactions in that moment, there's two like initial reactions that are like, there's so much, it's this very subtle thing of there's so much emotion there. And then they both like put their mask of being like this polite society person back on so quickly. Cause like he asks, can I see you back to your hotel or the inn or whatever it is. And she responds with no. And then goes, I just really like to walk. Like her gut react, like her emotions are so close to the surface that she just reacts with that big no.
Yeah.
And then she says she really loves to walk. And he just goes, yeah. I mean, yeah, I know. I did know that about you.
It's so cute.
It's like, I know everything about you and I love you so much in that one yes. And then her no of like, I can barely stand here right now because my feelings are so strong. I can't imagine us going back to the hotel together. That's too stressful.
Oh, it's so good. If we're going to talk about moments of characters barely being able to stand being in the same room as them, how about probably my favorite scene in the whole movie is the one where she's staying with her friend and Mr. Collins, and she's sitting at a desk writing a letter, and suddenly the door swings open and in charges Mr. Darcy. And the camera literally does like a quick zoom in on him. And she's like, hi, what are you doing here? And he just like can't give an explanation. He just like wanted to see her so bad that he like ran over to the house, probably to like give some big romantic declaration. But once he's there, he's tongue tied and he's just kind of like, you have a nice room here. Okay, bye. And then like runs away. It's so cute.
Yes, and both of them, like when you can see that awkwardness when they start realizing their feelings for each other. And like the fact that every time she sees him, she looks like she's just been caught doing something wrong, which only one time she was caught doing something wrong. Every other time it was just the other very similar, like, I'm going to actually hide instead, is when she gets back to the inn and she walks in and he's talking to her aunt and uncle and she literally hides behind a curtain.
I know.
It's so good.
It's so cute. I have to, since you have this movie memorized, that I don't feel bad quoting the things that I've memorized either. I love after she leaves and her friend is there and she's like, what on earth have you done to Mr. Darcy? And her response is, I have no idea. It's so good.
It's so good. Okay. Well, I want to talk about more Darcy and Elizabeth moments, because I think that there's a lot of things that we can talk about in this movie, but I'm just dying to specifically talk about those some more. Potentially the like 2 or maybe 3 big scenes that are like potentially my favorite scenes ever. I think that the proposal in the rain is maybe my favorite scene of anything ever. Did I stand up and deliver both sides of the speech? Who's to say? I was alone in my house.
My God. I mean, Ruth
I would never.
Your dog was there.
she knows snitches get stitches, so she would never rat me out. I did do that.
She's already been neutered, but something more could happen. So who knows?
One more could happen to her. Spayed, but close.
Okay, sorry.
Every part of that scene is so good. It has those high tension moments. It has the misunderstandings that can be played in a way that is so annoying to me in other situations. But I think there's a layer of them, particularly in historical romances and like period romances like this, that just make more sense to me, where like they aren't put in a position where they can truly be honest with each other. Like this is the first really honest conversation we see the two of them have.
Right.
Because every other thing, they're around other people. They have these societal pressures on them. And his list of like going through, like confessing his feelings, starting with the reasons he didn't think it was a good idea.
Yeah,
That's
poor guy.
Bad plan, bud.
Poor dummy.
It's the first time that he's been saying this to himself in his head for long enough.
Right.
So like you can just tell that it's someone who has no experience being emotionally vulnerable around someone else.
Yes.
And his feelings are just like so high. And then Elizabeth's feelings back to him, and that moment, that tension that we've talked about, the fact that they're like sort of stuck, the rain is requiring them to stay in this one place.
Yep.
And they're both like a little bit damp in a way that is very well done.
Oh my God. I was going to say, like her wet bangs, like why does her wet hair look that good? No one looks that good wet.
You have to have a professional hairstylist follow you around all the time, Piper. But the fact that like it makes their emotions are so high that they start just like being closer and closer and closer to each other. And then those moments where they're just sort of breathing And they're both very clearly like aware of the more than friendship tension that's happening there.
The thing that I love about that, that you get in a movie is just seeing each other's, like their eyes looking down at each other's mouths. Like that's something that you don't necessarily get in a book, where in the book, obviously the plus is that you get like their inner thoughts and emotions and all this other stuff. But in the movie, it's all about them. Like I'm always looking at their eyes, because they'll be going from like, I'm looking at your eyes and looking at your mouth. And then it's like, oh, are we going to kiss? Are we going to do it? And no, but almost.
And I love the similar vibe of like little things, like the moments where they stop, they're so in their emotional speeches and they're so angry and frustrated and the tension is high and and then suddenly like they both run out of steam just for a second. Like they just get thrown off the rhythm of the fight just for a second. And you can kind of see their breath catch as they realize how close they are to each other, and the fact that they're alone and that they're not allowed to be in that situation. And that's the moment where the eyes happen. And even though I have seen this movie enough times that I know all the words, and even though I know that they would never kiss in this moment, there's still a little part of me going, kiss, do it.
Oh my God. Like, what if they do it?
I literally in my notes at that point wrote kiss, 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 kiss.
Well, I love when they have that moment where they pause. That's when the thunder rumbles in the background, and it kind of like reminds them, it kind of recenters them to be like, oops, look where we found ourselves. I wanted to say, because you mentioned that you love enemies to lovers plots and like, fighting scenes that like lead to this. I find this is one of the only cases where a fight scene that leads to like romance works for me. I think sometimes it's done really poorly. I don't like when I feel like you see this in, let's say, like a Hallmark romance movie kind of a thing, where they're like, oh, we're doing like enemies to lovers, but it's really petty drama and there's zero chemistry between them. And they're just like fighting and yelling at each other. And then suddenly they're like making out. I'm like, no, you didn't deserve those kisses. You're mad at him. Remember what you just said? Like there's no emotional buildup to justify the kiss. But this movie does have that, and it does it really well.
Well, and I think it's that perfect balance. The reason why it's hard to do a misunderstanding trope, it's hard to do an enemies to lovers in a way that both feels real, but also doesn't make you hate any of the characters. Like it has to be the perfect balance of stakes where the stakes are high enough that you would say no to someone. Right. That you would turn him down in that moment. Her reasons for saying no to him are really good. And it's not just the crappy way he gave the speech. Like she has real reasons to believe that he has done harm to people in her life that she loves very much. Yeah. And he accidentally did. But they're not so high that his actions are unforgivable. Right. And I think we've talked about this in why it's so hard for me to get past Rochester, right? Like those, particularly when they don't play it well, or what I would consider well, that's hard to forgive your wife being locked in the attic.
And you lying to me this whole time. Yeah.
Yeah. You've been lying to me. I like that your hang up is the lying to me the whole time. And my hang up is the wife locked in the attic.
I mean, don't worry. I'm still hung up on you locking a married woman up in the attic, your married wife, but I'm just adding the lie on top of that.
Good. Great point. But also the misunderstanding doesn't feel contrived either. Like it makes sense that he misinterpreted Jane's actions, that Darcy misinterpreted Jane's actions as not liking Bingley, and that Bingley would have missed that, and that what he did in a different context seems right. Like it seems like he maybe did the right thing.
If I can build off of that idea, I mean, we also have the story of Darcy protecting his sister from Mr. Wickham. Right. And so I feel like we now have this sort of trend of Darcy being like, I don't want the people that I love to be taken advantage of or be made fools of in love, because he's seen what that can do to who is his sister, who was distraught. And I love the way that he says it. I can't think of the exact words, but he's like, I will not try to like put words to the depth of like her agony or something that he caused her. But so
words knowing that describe the depth of Georgiana's despair.
That's it. Oh my God. Yay. It's a good thing you have this memorized, Lillian.
Did I know I had it memorized? Not until yesterday.
But so I like that we have that precedence there too, because and what's more romantic than a guy who just wants to protect people that he cares about? Nothing.
Yeah.
I tell you, nothing.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, yeah, that protection and the way that he like, there's also this element of it that I think is so critical for me that I really love, where his protection of her does not end when she says no.
Mm-hmm.
He still loves Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And so he is still, when he goes to find Lydia and bring her back, and when he brings Bingley back to Jane, like
Mm-hmm.
that is, he doesn't think he's going to get her. This is not him trying to win her over.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we know it's working and it is
Yeah.
doing that, and that what she really needed was those three things: the real story about what happened with Mr. Wickham, the bringing Bingley back to Jane,
Mm-hmm.
and then acknowledging how important her family is for her and saving her family. Like that's it. She's totally in. But
Mm-hmm.
he didn't do that he did it for her, but he didn't do it to win her.
Yes.
And it's an important distinction. It's the whole idea of a nice guy, like,
mm-hmm. But done well, like legitimate.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is like, if you're doing something for someone because you think you deserve something back after that, then you're not really doing a good thing.
Right.
But if you're doing something for someone because you love them and you want them to have good things in their life, and you know that they matter, that it matters to them, like that's why Darcy did it. And that's why I will never stop loving him.
Yeah. No, Darcy, the fact that he goes off, I have here in my notes when they find out about Lydia running off and ruining herself and potentially the family, and he offers to help and she says, no, thank you. Like it's past help. And then he simply like, is like, all right, well, I'm going to go. Bye. And he leaves, but we all know that he is going off to like solve this problem. The way that he just like goes off and does that without like asking right for like a spotlight, it's all done discreetly, like using his power for good in this way is so sexy and romantic to me. Like, I'm just like, oh, he's a problem solver. He's just going to go and take care of this for the woman that he loves and for her family, because her family is essentially his family, or at least he hopes it will be one day. Yeah. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's so good and romantic and cute. So I did write down a quote because this plays well into what that we're saying. Can you think of what Darcy's friend's name is? Who's at the lady's estate? He's like in a military jacket.
Oh yeah. Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, cool.
Why do I know all of this? Why is that just in my brain?
That's so good. This is a good quiz and test for you. I love when Lizzie is at church with him and they're like whispering in the pews, and his line is, Darcy is a most loyal companion. And that is so true. Like that could be the start of a thesis paper on breaking down Darcy's character.
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think just to loop us back to another quote that I love that wraps up that moment in the rain when I literally wrote 4 kiss with exclamation points, that I wanted them to do it, even though we know they don't, but they should have, but they shouldn't have, but they should have. What he says in response to break that moment of tension where they're both just sort of like breathing at each other, is, forgive me, madam, for taking up so much of your time. And it's so well delivered. Yeah. And it's so sexy.
Yeah. And also like kind of sassy. It's like, well, fine, bye. And it's just like, ooh, ouch. Like, no, come back.
Yeah. And it's just so good.
Dude. I think so that kind of rivals Lizzie's unbelievable mic drop moment from the first dance after she overhears him telling Bingley that she's not handsome enough to tempt him. And so then later they're in that little circle talking, and he's like, well, what would you say to encourage affection? And she just looks at him and she's like, dancing, smiles, turns, walks away. And it's just like, oh shit.
I hate to correct you, but what she actually says is, what he says, what would you say to do to encourage infection? And she says, dancing, even if one's partner is barely tolerable.
There we go.
Which is an allusion to the line that he said about her.
Yes.
And then her walk away is like, so good.
Dude, powerful. I mean, after that moment, he's like, wow, I'm like yours forever. I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. Yeah. And who wouldn't?
And I think that's one of the best. There's lots of great roasts in this.
Yes. It's spicy.
The other great roast, which is not a spicy moment, but is just a fantastic roast from a favorite of the podcast, Dame Judi Dench as Lady Catherine. When she shows up and does the dramatic break into the house in the middle of the night and everybody's freaking out. The only thing she says when Mrs. Bennet is like doing her jabber away, nervous talking thing is, "You have a very small garden, ma'am."
Yeah, just
and I think that's
so
maybe,
savage.
Like, obviously the best burn is even if your partner is barely tolerable and then the turn and walk away, like he's not even worth her time. But "You have a very small garden, ma'am." You just came to these people's houses in the middle of the night.
And they're all in their long pajamas, their big shirts.
And Mrs. Bennet is doing an overshare in classic Mrs. Bennet style.
Yep.
Oh, so good. So many good burns in this. If you're looking for new insults, I highly recommend watching this. Because another one that was, I don't think Mr. Collins ever means to insult people. He's just this awkward.
So awkward.
But when Lizzie is at their house visiting and Lady Catherine comes by and invites them to dinner, Charlotte, the friend, is saying like, "It's fine. Like, don't worry about it. Just wear whatever you have that's best." And Mr. Collins goes, "Lady Catherine has never been adverse to the truly humble."
Yep.
Dude. That's such a rough thing to say to someone.
I want to do a pivot real quick because I made a list of moments of love from Mr. Darcy, which I think are important to check off. And I want to share what I have, and then you let me know if there were any key ones that I missed out on.
Fantastic.
Okay. So number one moment of love is when she walks all the way to the estate to go visit her sick sister, and he's just sitting at the breakfast table. And as soon as she walks in, looking like a goddess with her beautiful hair just slightly wavy, cascading down her shoulders, he sees her and he just like stands up instantly at attention. I mean, ooh.
It's the perfect beat of him sitting there like he's frozen in shock by this angel who has walked into the room. And then he like remembers that he's a gentleman and suddenly stands up with the perfect attention. So
good. That moment, number one. Number two, we talked about this on a recent episode, but when he helps her into the carriage and she looks down at his hand and he has that stare at her face. And as he walks away, he does that little hand flex like, "Oh my God, I touched her. I touched your hand."
Important hand flex note. I listened to an interview of that actor whose name is escaping me right now because he is Mr. Darcy, and that's all that really matters. And apparently that was something he'd been doing in rehearsal. So like they'd rehearse the scene and the beats and all that stuff. And the director was like, "Ooh, that's great. Let's get that." Nice. And that's the reason for all of the shots of his hand kind of throughout the movie, because there's other shots of his hand in other points in the movie. And it's because of the way that he was able to portray the character in that simple hand flex.
That's so good. Oh, well done, actor who plays Mr. Darcy, who we can't be bothered to look up.
Honestly, when I see him in other things, I just go, "Oh, look, it's Mr. Darcy." So
yes,
he's Mr. Darcy, guys.
I would say, okay, so instance number 3, and this is one of the best ones, is when, and I don't know if this is necessarily on his part, but I just think it's done so well cinematically, where they've had that kind of confrontation, but the sparks are flying. And then suddenly like they're the only ones in the room. That is great directing and like creative development. Like no one else is there.
In the dancing when the world melts away.
Yes.
So good. And the banter between them is like she's clearly, despite her best efforts, enjoying herself talking to him.
Yes.
Like she's making fun of him for being so awkward. But at the same time, you can see when she turns away from him and the way that dance is played, she turns away from him and she's always got this secret little smile.
Yeah.
And then the world melts away and it stops being that joke and it starts being that tension build that we talked about. We love so much.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Number 4, I would say, is both when he goes to listen to her play piano at his aunt's, but then more importantly is when we meet Georgiana and it's obvious that he's been bragging about Elizabeth to his sister. And she's like, "Oh, but he says you play so well." And he's like, "No, I said quite well." And she's like, "Oh, quite well. Very well. I am satisfied." And it's like so cute. He's just been like talking to his sister about how much he likes Elizabeth. And that's so sweet. And I also love the look, like the knowing look that Georgiana gives, where she looks between her brother and Lizzie and she's like, "Dude, we can all see it."
Yes. Yes, so good.
One of my last ones, because everything after this, I feel like is just like blatant love that's just obviously
Mhm.
shared, but is again at the inn once they have the bad news, his anxious pacing back and forth, like because he cares for her
Mhm.
so much and he's like feeding off of her anxiety that he can't sit still if she's upset. I love that too.
Yeah, and the like pacing and then the finally deciding that he needs to just sit down because he's like, I can't just keep pacing around this room. That's so weird. And then she comes in and she's fully sobbing because she's reading, and then she notices that he's still there and he has shot up when she
Mhm.
walked back in the room. And then she like goes, oh God, I have to collect myself before I'm in front of this man. Goes into the other room to like stop crying for a minute. He goes to sit back down. She comes back in, this time totally fine. Everything's fine. Oh,
Yes, those are my moments of love. Yeah.
the one, and it bounces off of your other moment of love, but back in that the ball scene when the when they're done dancing and she has that moment outside. And I'm a big fan of the moment of reflection of like letting us see the character kind of go, whoa, like
Yeah.
that moment of her really letting set in
Hmm.
something happened there, because
Yeah,
we
totally.
obviously know that, but her seeing that and reflecting on that and being like, I thought I hated him, but that was a moment. We just had this like whole thing, and like reflecting on her life, which in the book we're hearing a lot of. But
Right.
I love when adaptions give us that moment where they're alone. Um, and I think that I want to talk, I want to make sure that I don't think there's any love scenes other than the back half of the like everything's love and they just love each other.
Yes.
Like you said, that I'm seeing that you missed. But one other thing that I want to talk about that I think plays really well into the ball
Hmm.
is just how alive this whole world feels.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
So it's one of the things that I noted down is like from the very beginning, we start with the very first shot of the movie is the sun rising and the music playing and establishing these two, how both the scenery and the music are those additional characters that we talked about.
Yeah.
But when she walks in, we see the people of the household, we see the animals, we see
Hmm.
all of that. The
Yeah.
house feels alive. Everyone in every scene is living their life. It
Yes.
doesn't feel like, it feels like that house is full of love and full of life, and the town is, and everything.
Yes.
And that's such a critical part of what is so lovely about, like, I want to be in the Bennett family.
Oh
Like,
no, totally. I wrote down
I,
too, because I'm an only child. Well, I have a half sister, but she's 10 years older than me. So I feel like an only child. But I wrote down in this, I was like this movies like this make me want to like have a bunch of sisters. But yeah.
yeah, I always wanted a bunch of sisters. I also always wanted an older brother. And for those of you who know me, you might go, but Lillian, you
You
have an older
you do
brother.
have an older
And
brother.
he's great. And I love him very much, but he is not Mr. Darcy protective
Mm.
of his sister. Like, I wanted a brother who was like protective of me, and Rob's more of the literally at the Grand Canyon kept doing the like save your life. And that wasn't what I was looking for in an older brother.
Amazing. You're like, great, I just pissed my pants. You suck.
You know how I have a paralyzing fear of heights? Wouldn't it be fun if we were at a really high place and you kept pushing me off a cliff?
Oh my God. um I agree with you about the density of the scenes where we have like the living household and the life that is like palpable at the ball itself. I was saying to Sam that I'm so impressed by the choreography of how that single shot like camera moves through these scenes
Mhm.
and everyone is walking back and forth and having their conversations and we get little glimpses of the Bennets like sprinkled throughout of like Lydia and Kitty clearly drunk, like they got access to the wine and they are like totally smashed. And then also not pretty similar, their mother also pretty drunk too, sitting there dangling her little feet.
The wandering around eating pudding is how I want to live my life when
Dude,
I'm when I'm her age, I want to wander around with a crystal glass full of pudding and a long, long spoon and just kind of like hum and have
Yeah.
feathers in my hair.
Oh, totally. And I love how it's implied that they like stayed until morning. Like
Mhm.
everyone is like passed out in the carriage. Only Mrs. Bennet is still awake because she's jazzed that her daughter's getting married. But I love that they partied all night long. That's very cool.
And the fact that Mr. Bingley and his sister are looking out at the carriage and he's like totally obsessed with Jane and
Mm-hmm.
totally obsessed with the family and just like, oh God, what a great night with a great group of folks. And I'm just so happy to be here. And then his sister goes, Charles, you cannot be serious. And then turns around and walks away. And I'm just like,
I love how, because yeah, one of the things that Darcy says when he does his bad job of listing faults before proposing is talking about the impropriety of her family, like her sisters, her mother, on even occasions her father, which no way is Mr. Bennet ever like not cool. He's always just sweet and nice, and how could you see anything wrong with him?
I don't
I
think there's
say,
anything wrong with any of them. I think
yeah.
that there's obviously the impropriety of the mom and the sisters is
Oh
much
yeah,
clearer, although I find them endearing, but whatever.
I agree.
Um, there's moments. There are moments that Mr. Bennett is he
It's like,
is
tell me what
much
when.
more proper. He's much more proper in comparison to the rest of his family.
Mhm.
But the way that there's particular moments where like you see him eavesdropping at the door with the rest of his family.
Yeah.
There's other things. There's nothing as blatant.
Okay.
But he also, I mean, given the time, he's supposed to be the one keeping his daughters in check
Guess
and
so.
doesn't. And
Yeah,
I wouldn't say that's a criticism of him because I love his family.
I agree.
But
I
I
like that
think
he
that that's
encourages his daughters, or maybe not encourages, but allows them to be free and express themselves.
mhm,
I want to take a moment just to talk about Mr. Bennett because I think there's so many things about him that like are so charming and wonderful. Like the scene where Mrs. Bennett like gets him to go and talk to Lizzie. That whole scene by the lake where how did they get all
mhm.
those swans to take off at once? Gorgeous. But I love the little speech he says where he's like, "Your mother will never speak to you again if you don't marry Mr. Collins, and I will never speak to you again if you do." And it's just like so
It's
cute.
you'll have to be a stranger to one of your parents. And you're just kind of
Yes.
like, what? What does that mean? And she's standing there going, please, please, please don't make me marry this man. And he absolutely has the power to make her do that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so
No.
good.
That scene's
Um,
amazing. I love the
my
way he like teases his wife with cute little bantering, which I think is very flirty. When he's like, of course I like care about your nerves. They've been
This
my
is my favorite
companions.
line. I have it
Yes.
written down.
Say it right.
So it's she says, you have no respect for my nerves. And he goes, oh, you're mistaken, my dear. I have the highest respect for them. They've been my constant companion these 30 years or 20
Yes.
years or whatever it
Oh
is.
my
So
God, they're
good.
so cute. And then I don't know if we do have to wrap up soonish, but one of my final things about him, it's also I think one of the most tender moments in the whole thing. I am a huge sucker when it comes to like caring father-daughter relationships. Like if you show me a dad who loves his daughter, then I instantly like that character, regardless of anything else.
Cute.
But so the scene where Elizabeth goes to speak to him after Darcy has
Mhm.
proposed or asked for her hand. And you said earlier that moment where she steps away from the party to get her breath and it starts to sink in. I think we see that again when she's talking to her dad to convince him of all the good traits of Mr. Darcy. And she's like, if you only knew the things that he's done. And I think when she starts to say this out loud, it's the first time she's articulated it. And again, we see these emotions sinking in, and she's suddenly very upfront and like true to herself and her feelings when she's like, we're both so similar, we're so stubborn. And she starts to cry with like a big smile on her face. And seeing her that happy makes him that happy. And he starts to cry and smile as well. And it's such a cute moment to be like,
Yeah.
I genuinely see the pure love that you feel right here. And there's no way I could say no. So yes, you have my blessing. Go
Yeah.
get married. Yeah.
It's so good. Well, I know we're getting close to trying to wrap up, and you do have to cut me off at some point because I could do a minute. You know how like there's all sorts of lovely podcasts that'll read a book a chapter at a time. I could do a whole podcast doing this movie a minute at a time, which no one would want to listen to. So it's good that we're cutting me off.
Lillian, you are very wrong with that. If you want to do podcast part 2, when we conclude this, we'll do one scene at a time of Pride and Prejudice.
Not one scene, 1 minute, girl. I'm doing 1 minute at a time, 60-second increments. There's a couple of things that I want to call out that I think there's a few lines that do a really good job of describing my current attitude towards dating and men. Okay. And I think anyone listening to this podcast can tell that I am a romantic. I'm just very tired of the dating game right now. And so I'm a little bit cynical. But there's a few different moments that I think I want to talk about. My one quote that's really good is right after Mr. Darcy says the mean things about Jane or Elizabeth, and she hears them, is her friend Charlotte goes, if he liked you, you'd have to talk to him, which is sort of my attitude about meeting men. Is I'm like, ugh, I mean, none of them like me, but at least I don't have to have one in my house regularly. Another one that I think, and I had a couple other that are less impactful, but I think this really just articulates, I literally wrote down Jane Austen, 1813, Lillian Cotter, 2022, which
amazing.
Is, what are men compared to rocks and mountains?
Yes. That's one of my favorite lines in the whole thing. And it also ties into one of my last notes that I wanted to comment on, which is there is such an attention to nature and the like fullness and vibrancy of nature in this movie. We see, I mean, we get it with Lizzie enjoying her walks, which the movie opens that way. And at the end, when she and Mr. Darcy both need a moment to like connect to their feelings, they go for a walk through nature and they find one another. I think that moment, though, where we get the second line reading of what are men compared to rocks and mountains is right after her aunt and uncle's carriage has broken down. And so they decide just to have a little picnic on the roots of this unbelievable tree, which is clearly thousands of years old. And it's just like, it's amazing to me that they have this level of society where, you know, there are these wonderful gowns and these amazing houses, and yet they can still like walk not very far and come across these unbelievable things of nature that are still growing alongside them. And that kind of beautiful parallel, I think, puts us into this historical time where nowadays that's way harder to find. And I think it's really, it's so cool that they get to live alongside that.
Yeah, that's really gorgeous and wonderful. Another one of my favorite nature moments, which I think you're right, is we could just talk about that for an hour. But I wrote down specifically when she's contemplating life and we're getting the score and she's looking out over a cliff. I wrote down, I need a cliff to look out over. And I remembered after looking out my window that I live very close to some bluffs. So if you live in Red Wing, Minnesota, and you see some woman in a dramatic dress on a windy day looking out across some bluffs, just leave me alone. I'm doing this for me. This isn't for you. Leave me alone. I'm just trying to contemplate my life and my future. I probably just met a man and he talked to me and I was really annoyed by that.
Lillian has her headphones in. She's blasting the soundtrack, listening to this.
Am I also singing the soundtrack? Yes. It's not about you. This is a moment of peace for me.
Excuse me. Yes, I know this is a public walking trail, but go away.
I just start throwing a handful of loose gravel at people.
Like, do you mind?
Wait, this is my spot to contemplate life.
Incredible. I love that for you, Lillian. I can't wait for that moment to come.
I have one more thing, and then I think I think we should still do ratings for this, although it's clear what I would rate it.
Yeah.
So two other things that I think as themes for the podcast, we got to mention. One, lots of good dogs. None of them have names, but there's just kind of dogs throughout. Ruth really enjoyed it. That's my dog. For those of you who are new to the podcast, she liked the dogs barking. She was a big fan. She also liked the horses running.
Cute.
And then Bonnet Watch is back.
I made a note of that. Jane's bonnet.
Jane's bonnet.
Yes.
Jane's bonnet is in here. Jane's bonnet is arguably, I will follow our Instagram at Airbuds. I will be posting Jane's bonnet and 2011 Jane Eyre Jane's bonnet, because I think that we may have a contender for best bonnet.
I think I still have to do Jane Eyre 2011. That's still my favorite, but I was paying very close attention to Jane's bonnet, which I think we see twice. It's very
Yes.
fashionable.
She wears it. She wears it often. That with the blue jacket, the whole outfit works.
Yeah, so good.
And then Lydia's bonnet is the other one that I specifically want to call out. After she gets married, when she comes back, her bonnet that she's wearing, very, very good.
I like that too.
There's lots of good bonnets throughout, but those are the two big ones that I saw.
I also just want to give a last minute shout out to, personally, I think the sexiest outfit in the entire film are the riding clothes that we see Darcy and Bingley in when they're by the river and he spots Mr. Wickham and he angrily runs off on his horse with his giant cloak billowing behind him. Like, hello.
Yep. Just that made me remember like similar, I think he's wearing the same outfit. Something that I realize we're now talking about another thing, but is so important. The scene when Bingley is practicing his proposal with Mr. Darcy.
Yes.
Every second of that is so good. If you haven't just sat in that moment before, like if you've watched this, but you haven't like picked up on everything, the lines that they're saying are the funniest things that I've ever heard. His being like, so I'm going to walk in and she's going to tell me to sit down. And they both kind of go, no, she probably won't ask me to sit down right away. Okay. So then I walk in and I go, Miss Bennet. And then Mr. Darcy goes, Mr. Bingley.
Yeah, he's playing the role of Miss Bennet for her. It's so cute. He's the best wingman ever.
God. Anyway, go watch that scene.
It's so good. I think you also hear Mr. Bingley say, he's like, oh, this is a disaster. Like, it's so good.
There's so many other amazing scenes in the love part that we don't talk about, just to reference them so people know we know about them. Their final confessions of love before they go back in, when they agree to get married and she says, your hands are cold. Great. Nailed it. Love it so much. And then the very last scene, when he says, when they have the whole conversation about endearments and he says, Mr. Darcy, Mrs. Darcy over and over again, just in case one day I trick a man into falling in love with me and break down and allow him to live in my home. That is what a man should call me when he's incandescently happy.
Oh my God. I was going to say that
Mrs.
line.
Darcy.
Even you want him to call you Mrs. Darcy?
Yes, I do.
Wow. Okay.
I don't care what his name is. I want to be Mrs. Darcy.
That's incredible. I was going to mention the line incandescently happy. My final question for you, Lillian, that I mentioned at the top of the hour is, if you had to choose, could you pick one line? Like, what is your favorite line from this? Because I think mine probably is just simply the phrase incandescently happy. I do creative writing in my spare time, and I've definitely found myself tempted to use that line many times because it's like expresses that feeling so well that every time I'm like, oh, people will know this is from Pride and Prejudice. I can't just take that line. I love incandescently happy.
Yeah, I think it's so hard to pick because I do have such emotional reactions to everything. Like the very first line is the opening line of the book and is the opening line of the movie. And I get just like really viscerally excited when I hear it. But I think there's,
say it.
It's just the, did you hear that Netherfield Park has let it last?
Yes.
And then, which again, that just so everyone knows I wasn't kidding. I can do the movie from beginning to end. And I didn't know I had that skill. But there's so many lines. I think every line from the speech in the rain, I think every line when he comes back and says, you have to know it was all for you. And then his whole thing about like, if your feelings haven't changed, let me know now, but my wishes and desires have not. And that's just very sweet and lovely. But I think if I had to pick one line, it's actually a line that I had to Google to make sure that this was the origin of it, which is we are all fools in love.
Cute.
And I think you can see that it's the thing we were talking about with the shyness and the misunderstandings. I think this book is the origin of so many of those tropes in the way that story is told. And so many things are trying to be this. And Jane Austen deserves a lot of credit for creating that space. And I think We're All Fools in Love is something I've heard in other things, but is so lovely and such a wonderful sort of encapsulation of this amazing story.
I agree. That's a really nice wrap up for this too, Lillian. So well said and well done. I'm glad we got to watch one of your all-time faves, one of my all-time faves. And now I feel as if my palate is totally cleansed. I'm ready to dive back into Jane Eyre.
Well,
But
before we do that, I want your
yeah.
rating.
Okay. So I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10 incandescent lamps.
Oh,
Yeah. And if it's too hard for you to find a graphic of an incandescent lamp for our little GIFs, then
I'll find one.
Okay. She's going to go the extra mile for that. Good.
Yeah, I'm going to find. Now, you might look at that lamp and go, I don't think that's incandescent. I don't think you get to judge me and my lamp choices. I'm going to go, oh God. I just love this so much that I think I have to break the scale. And I genuinely think this is an 11 out of 10 for me. Like, it's
amazing.
It's more than a perfect movie. It's more than what anyone could expect. Every part of this is perfect.
Perfect.
And you'd have to, if somebody thinks that I shouldn't be able to rate things 11 out of 10, fight me.
Lillian, I've been planning to get into the negatives. I've been planning to get into the 20s. Like, it's going to happen. Don't worry.
Yes.
But what rating method are you using?
I think I'm going to go with 11 out of 10 bonnets.
Okay.
Because Pilot the dog is not in this.
True.
But I do think there's 2 really good bonnets.
Awesome. Worthy of that note. So I hope you guys have enjoyed fangirling over an incredible story and an incredible couple with us for the last hour and 15 minutes or so. But next week, we are getting back into what this podcast is all about, which is attempting to watch every adaptation of Jane Eyre that we can before we die. So it was actually recommended to us. Lillian, can you, while I say this, you can look up who it recommended it.
I've got it right here.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, maybe you should take the reins then. Tell us what we're watching.
So we, our amazing Instagram community, which if you are not following us on Instagram, we've got some really lovely conversations going on there. It's a great place to hang out, again, at Airbuds. And 2 of our amazing Instagram friends, Lady of Whimsy, suggested that we watched one from the 40s or 50s. And then friend of the podcast, Air Guide, who has an amazing podcast where they are reading the book chapter by chapter. She suggested specifically the 1957 version. And so we are going to be watching that. We found a version of it on YouTube, so don't do crimes. But that's what we're going to be watching, is the 1957 version of Jane Eyre.
Yay. Thank you guys so much for engaging with us so actively. It's been really fun getting to know you all. And we're also really excited for anyone new to come in, join the conversation, and join our fan club and our friends group. But yes, also definitely check out the Jane Eyre Files podcast, because
Air Guide.
Yes, it's wonderful. It's charming. It's a husband and wife, and their dynamic is well balanced and very cute. So definitely worth a listen. But yeah, I think with that, we might sign off and wish you happy watching, daydreaming, fantasizing, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye. Bye.